Welcome to this very special edition of the KJ Masterclass Live, the show which ensures that you profit from your time spent here with experts, either through their industry insights, information, or simply learning from them. And today we have Jeff Barnes. He's a motivational speaker, author, Walt Disney historian. He is known as the Dr. Disneyland. Welcome to the show, Jeff.
Thank you, Ajay. Welcome to you and to all of our listeners. And it's an honor to be with you.
Same here, Jeff. And we will understand from you, because everybody's story becomes different when they face different issues in life, so how to become the hero of their own great story. So help us understand, Jeff, that when we talk about becoming a hero in your story, why why Walt Disney becomes your hero and how he has himself impacted your life?
Well, that's a great question. I live in Southern California, about 30 miles from Disneyland, the first Disney park. And, we think of Walt as this successful businessman, this successful entrepreneur, and he absolutely was. But what people might not know are all of the failures that he experienced. Bankrupt at age 21, 100 years ago in 1923, loses his first successful cartoon character, which was not Mickey Mouse, but Oswald the Lucky Rabbit. Nobody believed in Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, and nobody believed in Disneyland. But Walt most wanted to be remembered not for his success, but as a storyteller. And he knew every great story requires conflict, requires difficulty, requires obstacle, requires adversity. And so whenever Walt faced, whether it was the bankruptcy, losing a beloved character, nobody believing in him or one of his ideas, rather than giving up, which is what I think so many of us choose to do, he just kept moving forward. And he used those setbacks and those doubts and those disappointments as an opportunity to level up in his story, knowing the bigger your dragon, the better your story.
Absolutely. The bigger your dragon, the better your story. But if your story is a very normal one and you have no dragons, only you, then how do you make your story great? Because how do you actually, what are the ingredients of a great story if without a dragon here?
Well, I don't think if you don't have conflict, you don't have a story. And I think it really starts with there. A lot of people, when they think of story, whether it's a book, whether it's a movie, or even an attraction at a Disney park, we're looking for that happily ever after ending. But that's not what makes the story. What makes the story are the twists and the turns, the ups and the downs, a willingness, again, to do hard and difficult things. Otherwise, it's just boring. And I come across a lot of people who aren't happy in their life. They're sort of bored with their situation and their circumstance. And chances are, if that's you today, you've accepted the idea of being comfortable. You've accepted the idea of, staying within a certain zone, doing what you already know how to do. But once you start tackling hard and difficult things, you're going to be excited. You're going to be invigorated. It's going to be difficult. That's sort of the point. But again, you're going to be living a much more interesting, better, and hopefully great story.
Right. You teach the world's only accredited college course on the history of Disneyland. What is it that you teach there, Jeff? Because initially you did not like anything about Disneyland.
I didn't.
And today, if you see, you are teaching there a course on the history of Disneyland. You've got two books, and build Wisdom of Walt and Life Lessons from Walt. And then you also, your life itself is so much. You are Dr. Disneyland. So help us this part. What is it that people can learn. And if you can tell from different aspects, one is the students part, others is from the business part. So help
Yeah.
us understand, three things at the same time, but they are so interrelated. I thought, why not give you that whole scope to deal it the way you want and at the pace that you want.
Yeah. So when I first went to Disneyland way back in August of 1988, I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't know what I did not know. Showed up at 11 o'clock in the morning. Park had already been open for 3 hours. Raced to the newest, latest, greatest attraction, which was Star Tours in Tomorrowland. Found out I was in the right place for the ride, wrong place for the line. Get rerouted all the way back to the front of the park, Main Street, USA, and end up waiting 3 hours before we experienced our first Disneyland attraction. By the time we get out of Star Tours, it's the middle of the afternoon, it's hot, it's crowded. And if you had told me, hey, 3 decades from now, you'll be doing what I'm doing today, I would have said you're absolutely nuts. But everybody in California and most people around the world love Disney and love Disneyland. And I had to get curious. Walt once said, the secret to success, and he never got past 9th grade in his formal education. Walt once said, the secret to success is courage, confidence, consistency, and curiosity. And I'm exceptionally curious. And so I had to know, why does everyone else love it? Why did I have a bad experience? Who was this guy, Walt? What is it that makes this park so successful? And that's when I discovered Walt was not born successful himself. None of us are. Difficult relationship with his father. So many of us have a difficult relationship with at least one parent, maybe both. More failures than successes, but he was incredibly resilient. And I fell in love with that story of resiliency and that idea of, I'm going to keep moving forward and do what I'm dreaming of doing no matter what. And when it came to the design of Disneyland, there were thousands of amusement parks in the world back in the 1950s, but we didn't have a park that engaged us mentally and sparked our imaginations. We only had parks that engaged us physically. Walt wanted to build a park that told stories. And everybody said it's never going to work. You're going to go bankrupt in 6 months or less. And the more people doubted Walt, the more he believed that he had the right idea and that he was on the right path. And so again, leadership in business isn't about managing the status quo. It's about taking you and your company, you and your team to a place that they've never been before. And that's what Walt did with Mickey Mouse when he put sound into Steamboat Willie. It's what he did with Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs when he gives us the world's first full-length animated feature film. And it's what he does with Disneyland when he gives us the world's first theme park. You step onto Main Street, USA, and there's a castle at the end of that street. Well, I live in the United States. I've been on a lot of main streets. There aren't any medieval castles at the end of a main street except at Disneyland and Walt Disney World. He gives us a compelling reason to follow him and to go deeper into that park. And if you're a manager, if you're a leader, if you're in business today, you have to give a compelling reason for people to buy from you. You have to give a compelling reason for people to follow you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. In today's time, a lot of leaders are under pressure. Whatever reasons, pressure their own creation, or maybe pressure from the top bosses, maybe from the board of directors or from wherever. A lot of them, a lot of them are afraid to make mistakes.
Correct.
There you got Walt Disney, once bankrupt. Others predicted that this venture will be bankrupt if they go. And the first day was almost like that. It was a disaster. Help us understand, instead of losing every bit of motivation and hope, he did few things. What was it? What is it leaders can learn from them? Instead of, you see, nowadays things go wrong, they fire employees. layoffs without thinking anything. And then they quote these great people whenever they have a crisis, but they never learn anything out of it. Help us
Correct.
from that perspective, from the first day of disaster and what was it he did to fix it, so that a lot of people learn how to fix things that can be fixed.
Yeah. So Walt, whenever he was in a crisis, and he faced them over and over and over again, and we all have the same choice. You can either panic or pivot, implode or innovate, retreat or be resourceful. And Walt was always pivoting. He was always innovating. He was always making the choice to be resourceful. And so, when Disneyland opened July 17th, 1955, you're right. It was an abject disaster. It's known today within Disney history as Black Sunday. Everything that could go wrong did go wrong. I think the most important piece to getting that turned around was Walt took responsibility for everything that went wrong on Black Sunday. And responsibility is simply having the ability to respond well. And Walt responded very well. Again, he took responsibility. He held himself accountable. He didn't blame the press and the media. He didn't blame the guest. He didn't blame his own employees or cast members. He was like, yeah, we've got some things that we've got to pay attention to. We've got some things that we have to fix. And the next day, they went around starting to fix them rather than blaming others. But I think the other piece to this is Walt controlled what he could control and ignored what he could not. So part of the problem with Black Sunday is there was a terrible heat wave in Southern California the day that the park opened. It was like 105 degrees in the shade. And that heat wave lasted for another 2 weeks. Walt didn't talk about the weather. He didn't complain about the weather because there wasn't anything he could do about the weather. How many of us spend our days complaining about things completely out of our control, and yet the things we can change and we do have control over, we don't say anything about and we don't take any responsibility for?
Absolutely, absolutely. So there is you teach about Walt in your classroom, and then you call Disneyland as the happiest classroom on earth. Tell us about the Disneyland part. Why do you call it the happiest classroom on earth? People generally look at it from a amusement part, or from a entertainment side of things.
Yeah, that's a great question, AJ. I don't see the park as just an escape. I see it as an example. And I don't see Disney as the place where dreams come true. I see it as the place that can actually show you how to make your own dreams come true. You have to recognize that your life is a story, and you can change it, you can edit it, you can start living a different story at any point. But again, it's going to require doing hard things and embracing conflict. But then secondly, Disney is known for its attention to detail and its cleanliness. Well, a couple of great stories. When Walt said to his wife, Lily, honey, we're going to build an amusement park, she was horrified. She wanted nothing to do with the amusement park business, telling Walt, why would you want one of those? They're filthy. Well, Walt's response was, that's the entire point. Mine will be clean. So whatever business you're in, what is it that everyone else does that the customers hate? How can you do the exact opposite and differentiate yourself as a result? And then a second story, very first attraction that was ever finished for any Disney park anywhere in the world was the old Frontierland stagecoach line. And they were building that stagecoach at the studio in Anaheim, and then they were going to ship it down to Disneyland. And the very last piece was a leather strap. And the Imagineer, John Hinch, who was assigned to that project, no matter what he did, he couldn't get that leather strap to Walt's liking. And finally, out of frustration, he throws it across the room and says, Walt, it's just a leather strap. No one's going to notice. No one's going to care. And Walt stops him and says, John, you're underestimating people. The guests are going to notice. They are going to care. Every time they come to Disneyland, they're going to see something, notice something that they've never seen or noticed before. That's what's going to keep them coming back over and over again. And so it's not just that Walt had this grand vision, but he was a stickler for the details. And so if you're a leader or whatever business you happen to be in today, when's the last time you saw your business from the eyes of your guests, the eyes of your customers, and thought about what are they seeing over and over and over again that compels them to be a returning guest and a returning customer?
Right. Right, Jeff. Why do people still remember, Disney's story? Is it dreams? Is it success? Is it struggles? There seems to be something, some blend there, which nobody seems to, get it in the right manner. You are Dr. Disneyland. Maybe you get it. You talked about, about writing your own story. You had that story for 20 years. And then when you began writing it, you could write it in just 142 days to make it a best-selling book. Help us understand, what is it that that thing that was there in that cauldron that keeps, the legacy of Walt Disney alive? There have been many entertainers, but not like this. The story, still reverberates everywhere.
Well, I think, first of all, Walt tapped into the children in all of us. Now, granted, we all start out as kids, right? But at some point we become adults. At some point we grow up. And Walt looked at the world and said, why do we have to grow up? Why can't we see the world through the innocence of a child? And he created cartoons that tapped into that with the indomitable Mickey Mouse, movies like Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs that again tapped into that. But even when he built Disneyland, and the original budget for that project was $3.5 to $4 million. He had spent well over $17 million before the park opened. And people asked him, why are you doing this for kids? And he stopped and said, oh, no. I'm not doing this just for kids. Kids don't have any money. I'm doing this for the adults, recognizing that we all have a child within us, and we're all looking to not only live a better story, but to step into a better story. And Walt built a park that, again, told stories that we at any age can step into and feel better about ourselves, feel better about life, feel better about the world.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So let's look at it this way. You tell Walt's story in your manner. You talk about his lessons, and you are Dr. Disneyland. At any point in time, if you meet Walt Disney himself and you say, I am Dr. Disneyland, and he asks you how authentically you have told my story, what would be your answer to him? And if he asks, how have I impacted your story at all?
Yeah, Walt died in December of 1966, and I was just a little over 3 years old. So I never met him. Don't remember his, passing. But again, as I got into, the story of Walt's life and the story behind the park and the stories that the park's trying to tell, it was really all about using that as a vehicle to challenge people to not just go to Disneyland and experience stories, but to then leave the park and start living their own great story. I spent 22 years in higher education and worked a lot with struggling students. And these were all students who could do the work, but for whatever reason, they were choosing not to go to class, not to do the work, not to take the test. And I wanted to find some vehicle that would allow me to motivate and inspire these kids who had massive amounts of ability to start showing up and achieve their goals and experience success. And, here in Southern California, if not the entire United States and the world, everybody loves Disney and what it takes to achieve your goals, to be a great leader, to be successful in business. Those principles are pretty much the same. They're universal everywhere. But if I just started talking about those ideas or those principles, the kids in university were going to tune me out. But if I could talk about it through the language of something they loved, i.e. Disney and Disneyland, now I've got their attention. And so that was the idea behind the course. The course became a couple of best-selling books. And now I write and speak full-time because I want to see people living better and greater stories.
Absolutely, absolutely. So for those people who want to learn more about stories about Walt Disney, about Disneyland, about Dr. Disneyland, what's the best way for them to connect with you?
Well, like everybody else, I'm on the internet. So you can find me at thewisdomofwalt.com. And, you can learn about my speaking there. You can learn about my books there. I think for everyone, you can sign up for my free weekly Wednesdays with Walt blog, which is a weekly email that's a source of inspiration, motivation, fun facts from the parks, trivia from Walt's life that, again, is going to help motivate and inspire you wherever you are in your story today. And if you go again to thewisdomofwalt.com under resources and sign up for the blog, you're immediately going to get 7 leadership lessons from, guess where? Disneyland, the happiest place on earth. So let me encourage you and any of our other listeners, again, go to thewisdomofwalt.com. You don't have to hire me to speak, although that'd be great. You don't have to buy my books, again, although that'd be great. Sign up for the free email, and you can start experiencing Walt's wisdom 100% free every single week.
Wonderful. With this, it's a wrap on this very special edition of the KJ Masterclass Live. Thank you so much indeed for joining us.